You're listening to the Shamash Alidina radio show. Listen, learn, enjoy.
Hello, my name's Shamash Alidina and welcome back to the Mindfulness Radio Show. This week I'm joined by Mirabai Bush. Mirabai is co-founder of the Center for Contemplative Mind in Society and is currently Associate Director. Mirabai was a key player in helping to establish a mindfulness program at Google actually called Search Inside Yourself, and she's recently released a CD called Working with Mindfulness, which is how I found out about her actually. So first of all, thank you very much for your time today, Mirabai.
I'm happy to be here.
So my first question is actually, how did you learn meditation or mindfulness in the first place?
Well, in 1970, I was traveling in India, and I heard by chance that the first meditation course for Westerners was being taught by a Burmese teacher in Bodh Gaya, the place where Buddha was enlightened, and it sounded like the thing to do. I was in India really trying to simply absorb India, and I had never meditated in my life, and so I just went, and it was a 10-day course where we practiced from morning till evening. I had never even sat down with my legs crossed, and I really loved it. I completely loved it, and I could see that it had the potential to really change my life in the world. So I stayed for a couple of months there, and then after that I studied with other Buddhist teachers, and I had a Hindu teacher also in India who didn't really teach us mindfulness, but was mindfulness.
Oh wow, that sounds nice.
Yeah, it was great.
That sounds even better than the normal mindfulness. Okay, and I mean, what were the steps in between? Perhaps you could just give us a little bit of an idea how you went from that to co-founding this Center for Contemplative Mind in Society.
Well, so I stayed in India for 2 years, and it did change my life, and it did change the way in which I understood things. And I was also there with a number of other Westerners whom I met there who came back, and it was kind of the beginning of the mindfulness movement in this country, if you could call it a movement, or in the West, because we did come back through London. I was there with Joseph Goldstein and Sharon Salzberg and Wes Nisker and Ram Dass and Krishna Das, many other people who, when they came back, helped really begin a deep interest in these practices from the East. So, but when I came back, I was pregnant and then had a child here, and so couldn't really begin a monastic life of teaching, which is the way mindfulness was taught in the beginning. In this country, it was very much taught in a monastic style, and so there wasn't really space for bringing up children and that. So but I very much wanted to bring what I had learned into my life here. So with my then husband, I started a company based on principles of right livelihood, which is a mindful way of running an organization. And the business was called Illuminations. And we made products that tried to demonstrate the common heart of all spiritual religious traditions. I did that for 10 or 15 years, and we had as many as 100 people working at a time, so we really built community and had to, as the business got bigger, we had to figure out ways in which principles like always tell the truth, be compassionate, how those principles worked in a business that was integrated with the rest of the American business network, and we learned a lot from that. And after that, helped build another organization called Seva Foundation. Seva means service in Sanskrit, as you know. And we worked mostly in blindness in India and Nepal. And it was started by a number of us who met in Asia and who wanted to give something back for all that had happened to us there. So, and a number of those people happened to be doctors and epidemiologists, and they worked on the end of smallpox, which, as you probably know, happened in Bangladesh. So we started this program working to eliminate unnecessary blindness, and we work closely with doctors and hospitals in India and Nepal, and brought sight to millions of people at no cost. And in this country, we raised money, and we did a lot of it through concerts, and we had a relatively big, or not big, but an organization that had to be managed here. And so I worked with that for many years and tried to bring those same principles into it. And then out of that, I started the Center for Contemplative Mind with some other folks. We were asking ourselves if these practices that we did could be helpful and beneficial in secular mainstream areas of life. And we decided to put together an organization to explore that, and we did that in 95.
Okay, wow. So you've a real life of service with all these wonderful organizations that you've helped to create. You mentioned that Illuminations as an organization that helps to bring the principles of mindful business, I suppose. Were there like a handful of like 4 or 5 key principles that you tried to teach?
Well, I would say the first thing was to always tell the truth. That was the most radical thing in the business community. We would, for example, in the Boston printing community, if you needed something on Friday, you would tell them you wanted it on Monday because they never expected you to tell the truth. They always figured you'd tell them earlier, because you knew they were going to be later.
Yeah.
So we decided we were always going to tell the truth. So we would say we needed it on Friday. Of course, it was never ready on Friday, but we really did need it on Friday. So it led us to question and look at the whole way in which the whole sense of trust and honesty was held things together, but was quite porous.
Yeah.
But with each other, we held to that. We also encouraged practicing compassion and empathy in terms of getting along with each other, working through conflicts, and through that looking at the nature of competition and appreciating that it's healthy only when we also remember that we're all cooperating at something much larger than that. We encouraged paying attention to the product and not adding more stuff to the environment that we really don't need. Making sure the product's in harmony with our personal values. And really encouraging people to look at their personal values and making sure or helping to bring those more closely in line with their work values and how they're working. Making sure that their work really does align with what it is they really want to be doing in the world. Things like that.
That's really, those all sound fascinating actually. I think we could make a program about each one of those because that's some really big...
Yeah, we learned a huge amount.
Yeah.
And none of us knew anything about business. I mean, I started it with one other person, and we had both taught in the past. I didn't know anything about business. And we learned as we went, but which allowed us to stay faithful to these principles because we weren't really sure what we were supposed to be doing. So we just did it that way. And, of course, now, in this country, over the years, there are quite a few, not just in this country, but companies, there became the, I forget, a network of businesses who wanted to create a way of business that was more in line with personal and environmental values. And so places like, in the early days, places like Ben and Jerry's and the Body Shop and like that really stood for having their personal values and their professional work be aligned. Yeah. And now we see it in much bigger ways. We also see the opposite, of course, but at Google, which we can talk about later, is, their motto is don't do evil. And, of course, they get criticized all the time for various behaviors in China or whatever, but people take it seriously there. So, and they do many things there that really are what we were trying to do in those days on a much smaller scale.
Yeah. Well, this would be a nice point to talk a little bit more about Google and your involvement in their Search Inside Yourself program. Could you say a bit more about that?
Sure. So in the center, we did from the beginning work with organizations. We worked with people of common interest, so we would bring together groups of lawyers or environmental leaders, journalists. But we always worked with organizations as well. And so we worked inside Hearst Publications. We worked with the Federal Trade Commission, and worked with universities. And so at a certain point, Meng, who is the person who recently wrote this book called Search Inside Yourself, which is a wonderful introduction to mindfulness, especially for people who are young and geeky, techie, and or even just scientific, because the program really wraps the mindfulness around with the neuroscience of meditation and mindfulness. But so Meng wanted to bring mindfulness or meditation in general into Google. He was one of the original engineers there. He was number 107. And when Google went public and those engineers all became very rich, Google told them they could stay if they wanted to, and they could kind of do what they wanted to do as long as it had something to do with Google's mission. And Meng really wanted to bring meditation in. So he tried by introducing mindfulness-based stress reduction, and he promoted it, and nobody signed up for it. And he thought, he just thought if he just kind of put up a sign, or online, that people would flock to it. But they didn't. So he was puzzled, and he called me and asked me to come on out and look at it with him and try to help him figure out how he could introduce it. So I went there, which is a really wonderful place to visit, and if you have the chance, you should sometime. Probably Google London looks very much like Google, in Mountain View, although the weather's somewhat different.
Yeah, you're right.
It's a big campus. It's kind of, I see it as an extension of Stanford, really. But and it's all in primary colors, and there's great food everywhere, and there's ping pong and volleyball and so on. Yeah. And but there wasn't any meditation. So we looked at why people wouldn't have signed up, and we came to realize that the idea of stress just didn't work there. People either thought that they weren't stressed because they had the best job in the world, but although, of course, they were. We all are. We're even stressed at the Center for Contemplative Mind. So but they didn't think they could be, you know. And then some people thought that they were stressed, but stress had gotten them to the top of their class and gotten them this job at Google. It had been a motivator for them, so they didn't want to get rid of it. And then some other people thought that they were stressed, but it wasn't cool to be stressed, so they didn't want to admit they were stressed by taking this course. So we said, okay, I guess stress reduction is not the way in for Googlers. So we looked at what would be. And we recognized that pretty much everybody there is young, very smart, very well educated, and had been in front of their screens most of their life. And it's, so they're really good at doing the things that you do alone, and they can figure out an algorithm sitting in front of the screen, but they have to work in teams a lot, and they were not so good at self-awareness or awareness of others, so which requires mindfulness. So we thought, well, if we could frame this as encouraging emotional intelligence, that might be more helpful for people. People might perceive it as more helpful. So we asked, and the Google population is roughly, I mean, it looks this way in the dining rooms. I don't know the actual numbers. It's about 1/3 Indian, 1/3 Chinese, and 1/3 everybody else. This is in Mountain View. And so there's a whole multicultural communication stuff that they have to work with as well. Yeah. So we reframed it as mindfulness-based emotional intelligence, and we focused more on listening practices, on loving kindness and compassion practices, on communication, but it all rests on basic mindfulness practice, of course. Mm-hmm. And Danny Goleman came out and gave a talk about the connection between emotional intelligence and these practices. And we posted it again, and in 4 hours, 140 people signed up.
Wow.
And then we taught it, we kept it in beta for 2.5 years, and we kept, after every time it was taught, we looked at the responses and adapted it so that it would be more and more clear. Because, and almost any of us who have taken one course in mindfulness can sit down and tell somebody else, close your eyes, bring your mind to your breath, follow your breath in and out, and let go of thoughts and emotions. But really reaching people in a way where it's very meaningful to them requires framing, and it's different with every group, with every population. So here we give a talk on the neuroscience of mindfulness, and then also a lot of the examples as it's being taught are drawn from both the workplace and from the science. And it's been amazing. It's now, I was just at the Academy of Management in Boston for their annual meeting, and Rich Fernandez from Google was there. And he was reporting on how all these other courses now have developed around the core course, which is called Search Inside Yourself. And there's a course in compassion, and there is a stress reduction course, and mindfulness has now become a part of the Google culture. And hundreds of people, I don't know, maybe at this point thousands in Mountain View, but it's also been taught in Zurich and London and Beijing and Singapore, New York, so on. So it's been a pretty amazing thing to watch how this basic practice, I always say these practices aren't they're not Buddhist. They are Buddhist, but they're also more than that, and more than, they are spiritual in the sense of they lead people to questions of meaning. But really, they're human practices. They're practices about waking up, and waking up at work is a really great thing since we spend so much time there.
Well, that's incredible, because Google's probably the number one most influential company in the world at this time.
Yeah, it got the award from somebody recently for, best place to work.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, one of the business magazines, but, and it fits so naturally with what people are doing. They do mindful emailing, they'll type out the email, then just take 3 deep breaths, paying attention to your breath and the sensations in your body, and not to the email, and then returning and rereading it, particularly from the perspective of how the person on the other end will receive it at the emotional level as well as the content level, and then making changes if necessary and sending it. And that's helped a lot.
That sounds like a great concept. I was going to ask you, what are the main differences between mindfulness-based emotional intelligence and the more standardized mindfulness-based stress reduction course? What are the main ways in which you've changed it?
Well, it focuses more on, the practices are the same, but we focus more on loving kindness practice and compassion practices. We do a great practice called Just Like Me. I don't know if you know it. It's based on a traditional compassion practice from the Buddhist text. Mm-hmm. But the way we do it is to have people sit across from each other, or sometimes we do it in lines, standing in 2 lines facing each other. But and then someone leads them through it with phrases like, just like me. You start out with really basic things. Just like me, this person is a human being with a body, mind, heart. And then you go to this person, just like me, this person has suffered. Just like me, this person has been hurt in his life. And just like me, this person has made mistakes. And so on. And then just like me, this person wants to be happy. Yeah. This person wants to be free. And so there's a whole series of them. And you go through it looking at the person across from you, just keeping your gaze on them the whole time. And they're doing it for you at the same time. And it's amazingly powerful. And it's particularly good when people are across from someone they've never seen before. So, which we can do because people from all different departments show up for these courses. And then after doing that, it's very difficult to objectify the other person. You're working with them, or you are in disagreement with them about something. It's very hard to just write them off. You remember. You don't have to remember, but you do remember. This person's trying to do a good job just like me. And this person may be not doing it very well, making mistakes, or doing it in a way I wouldn't do it. I do that same thing. Yeah. And therefore, let's find a way to work through it.
Wow. So it's kind of, in some ways, it's different to a loving kindness practice. So do they say it out loud, or does somebody guide it out loud, or
that one's done out loud? Yeah. Of course, you can do it yourself in the way that you would do a loving kindness practice. You can, sitting in silence by yourself, bring someone to mind and then say those phrases. But we also do the traditional loving kindness practice where people do it with eyes closed, bringing to mind, oneself and then others, and sending loving kindness. And sometimes in those settings we call it wishing well. I wish this person well.
Yeah.
It's something that you can do in the morning when you come in and sit down at your desk. You know, you can think about the people you're going to be working with that day. You know, you can wish each of those persons well.
Mm.
It sounds like almost nothing, but it turns out that opening of the heart just, it affects pretty profoundly the way that you are with people after you do those practices.
Mm. Yeah, I can imagine. And so you have mindful emailing and you have these kind of loving kindness type practices. Is there anything in particular which is focused on workplace settings, like, you know, using the telephone or communicating with other people?
Yeah. Well, you know, there's a few things. One is taking a minute at the beginning of the day, or as many minutes as you can, and setting an intention for the day. Just remembering today. Today, I want to be mindful. Today, I want to stay awake. You know, today, it might be more specific. Today, when I am in that meeting at 2:00, you know, I want to stay in my center and really listen mindfully for what's being said, instead of rushing in with the idea that I've crafted before I even get to the meeting.
Mm.
So, having intention, walking from place to place, which many people do in their workplace. You can drop into mindful walking, you know, instead of just walking with your head full of ideas. You can take that time to bring your awareness to the sensations in your body as you're walking, or to like what Thich Nhat Hanh calls a gatha, a verse. I really like, when walking, saying over and over, I have arrived, I am home. I have arrived, I am home. And then when you get to wherever you're going, you're in a really quite different place within yourself than you would have been if you'd just been going through your lists or, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
So that's helpful. Some people do use we call it doorknob practice. There's one thing during the day that every time you do it, you just bring your awareness back to your breath for a few breaths. So, like every time you open a door, every time you put your hand on a doorknob, you feel the sensations there, or you bring your awareness to your breath, or in an elevator, or whatever works in the environment that you're in. Some people, when the phone rings, but I said these days, the phone doesn't ring that much anymore. You know, it's all happening in other ways.
Yeah.
But just letting it ring 3 times before you pick it up. I have to admit, I've never been successful with this practice, but I always pick it up immediately.
Yeah.
But some people like that because it is hard to do, you know, and so then they breathe through it and they watch their body as the sensations in their body as the desire to answer the phone arises, you know.
Yeah. What about the fact that people are almost constantly connected? So you know how when an email comes through, it makes a noise, and we get these text messages that are kind of coming through all the time. Do you suggest for people to kind of turn it off for a certain amount of time?
Yes. I mean, Google, I think, makes actually a program where you can turn it off, you know, for X minutes at a time. And it even has, you know, fail-safe methods so that, you know, if you really need to hear from one person, that one will get through, but everything else will be held for, you know, however long you indicate. You can do that. I think that just simply putting it all down and going for a walk or sitting in silence for short periods is extremely helpful. There are a lot of people are looking at this now. Everyone from scientists to psychologists to educators, they're really aware of what's happening to our metabolisms and our cortisol levels and all of it, and how we're losing certain capacities by being on all the time and reacting to all of this all of the time. So, I know from my own experience that it just really helps. And sometimes it's really hard to just turn it off. The expectation now that you'll respond immediately is out of control.
Yeah.
You know? Even on the weekends, if you don't look at it over the weekend and come back, there are all these, urgent, why didn't you answer kinds of messages. I think we have to be pretty disciplined.
Yeah.
Just taking, if you even take like a few minutes and just leave it all, it really helps. It really helps your mind and your body.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, mindfulness practice is perfect for that.
Yeah.
If it's one of those, if it didn't exist, we would have had to make it up, because it's so perfect for letting go of all of that. And at the center, we have our biggest program actually is in higher education, and we have professors around, internationally, integrating practice and particularly mindfulness into their teaching. And, they're all concerned about it. And many of them are doing amazing work where they're using mindfulness to look at the nature of their discipline, using mindfulness in economics to help us look at the nature of desire, which is at the heart of every economic decision. So just bringing the mind to watch thoughts and desires arise and fall away. So there's profound work going on, but almost all of them use some mindfulness to just help students let go of everything for, some time at the beginning of class or at the end of class before they begin again.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I thought is that when you give people the permission to have a little bit of space, then there may be the opportunity for new ideas to arise or to be a little bit more creative.
Absolutely.
Have you had any kind of examples of people like Googlers saying that arose for them?
Well, in higher education, people report that all the time, that
Really?
Their students report that they have much better ideas and they're much more creative, and they make connections they haven't seen before. And I think that there's anecdotal evidence at Google, but excuse me, but I don't have any kind of case study material. But you know yourself, just these insight comes. One touching one happened one day. Most people at Google are pretty young. For a lot of people, it's their first job, and so and it's intense. They're totally into it, and they work long hours. So there was this one young guy, and he reported back when we asked what kinds of things had happened to them because of doing the practice. He said, I was sitting one day, and he said, since I've come here, all I think about is Google, and all I think about is my work. And I have good friends who aren't here, and also my family. I'm close to my family, but I noticed that when my family would call up, I would just be waiting till they got off the phone so I could get back to my work at Google.
Wow.
And he said, when I realized, he said, I knew that was happening, but when I was sitting, I looked at that and I realized I really care about them. I don't want this to happen. So he said, I made up a practice for myself, which was every day I was going to find one thing that would be interesting to my friends or family about Google, so that when I talked to them, I would have something that would connect my two parts of my life.
That's lovely. That's such a nice story, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh wow. Yeah. And he realized that through doing the Search Inside Yourself
program.
program.
Just sitting, doing just 20 minutes of practice or whatever,
Yeah.
When we quiet down, these insights can come in a moment, It's really such a blessing.
Yeah. And because Google likes to use technology a lot, I was wondering if they use things like their Google Video or the Google Hangout to actually practice mindfulness together.
Very good question. I thought, when I went out there, aha, at last, we're going to figure out how to use the new technology for the old practice. And it turned out that we did, in 2.5 years or so, we did not use technology at all. It was all face-to-face. One of the main teachers of it was Norman Fisher, who was the abbot at the San Francisco Zen Center. And they ended up calling him the abbot of Google. But anyhow, he embodies, he's lived in that monastery his whole adult life, and he really embodies the non-technical, And it was all face-to-face and in small groups and walking outside, and we didn't do we didn't use technology at all. We didn't even have a website for it. So, and then the first big communication thing was Meng wrote a book with hardcovers that was published by a regular publisher.
Yeah.
And so, however, now the next stage is that it's gone from what they call beta of the exploratory experimental stage into now there's such a demand for it that it's impossible to meet that demand with all one-on-one and small groups and so on. So now we're experimenting, we're videoing the course, and it obviously could be put up online. And we're looking at Google Hangout for ways to, certainly we could do discussions and talks and so on. There have been talks on, Meng gave a TED talk which was distributed around, but and Danny did this talk for them that was on video. But other than that, I think that Google Hangout will probably be a good use of the technology for this.
Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if this is now going to spread, because now that Meng has written a book, which is, I think, sold a lot of copies, it's a bestseller in a lot of places. Do you think it's going to spread into other companies?
Yes, yeah. We formed a nonprofit to respond, to train people and to teach it and to respond to the requests from other companies. And that's just starting now. But, yeah, there will be, for sure.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. Starting from the top and filtering its way down.
Yeah.
Fabulous. I was kind of looking at your bio. And a few kind of little things caught my attention. One of them was that you're the first professional woman to work on the Saturn Apollo moon flight at Cape Canaveral. So was that before or after you got into your mindfulness?
It was before. It was a long time ago. That was
okay.
The moon launch was 1969. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was, of course, really fun.
Yeah.
But it also taught me the power of people working together in a team for a common vision. It's hard to appreciate now. I mean, we just landed on Mars this morning, so it's really hard to appreciate what a big deal that was.
Yeah.
What it was. And most of it was all men, 100 at a time, and, big rooms, working with typewriters,
Really?
There weren't any computers. I mean, there were some computers in the background doing things very slowly. But so and most of these guys were engineers from airplanes in World War II. It was, I mean, it's so amazing that it happened. And but they were all so committed to doing this thing. And I just saw how powerful it is when people are, brought together with a common goal, common, I think there you could call it a vision, but certainly a mission. And how that motivated them and got them through the difficulties of workplaces. So that's I think that is something that mindfulness can really help us. It can help us remember our original motivations. I mean, we may not, be in an environment where we're putting a man on the moon, but if we remember why we are there, and then find out where that overlaps with why other people are there, and then what we're doing together. Motivation is extremely important, and mindfulness really can help us see why it is we're doing what we're doing. We've used a practice in a lot of settings that the Wilderness Society environmental organization here adopted it, and then they adapted it to, and they call it the talisman. But what we do is have everyone coming to a meeting or something bring an object that had something to do with their original motivation for becoming an environmentalist or a teacher or a public interest lawyer, whatever the group was, and then tell the story of the object. So the environmentalist would bring someone brought a tool that his grandfather, who had been a beekeeper, had given him. And then he told by understanding about the bees, then he began to understand about biodiversity and so on, and that led him. And other people brought pictures of, the most beautiful place they'd ever been that had moved them and so on. And then instead of talking about themselves, they told about themselves through telling the story of the object. And it's storytelling is so powerful, and but this, through doing it in a mindful way, we'd start with silence. We'd have a little silence and ask people to just return to their breath and absorb each story after it was told. Again, that helps people understand themselves and who each other is in a deep way, and that really helps the work.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and there's something magical about storytelling. I think it goes back to ancient times when we were sitting around a fire telling stories to each other, and that's actually part of the reason why I asked some of these questions about your background, because people are curious and they want to hear the story of how it all began.
Yeah, so, that was a great one.
Yeah.
Being in those bunkers, for the countdowns and.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
And I mean, there was a very clear goal in a sense, wasn't it? John F. Kennedy said that by the end of the decade we want to get someone on the moon. So that gave the goal or the vision for people to work together towards a common goal.
Yeah.
So the mindfulness is about clarifying our own values and things like you mentioned, but it also helps us to work with each other, which I suppose is what Research Inside Yourself program is about. Creating that emotional intelligence, so the Googlers could work together for their mission to do no evil. Yeah. The other thing I just noticed about your background is you've been to an incredible number of different countries, and you mentioned that you've trekked there, and I think you've worked in some of those places too. So in Guatemala, Mexico, Costa Rica, Nepal, India, Morocco. The list goes on. So. Did you find, what was it like to work in these different countries, and did you find some naturally more, in inverted commas, mindful than others?
Well, I guess if I think about mindfulness, I think our human struggles make it hard for all of us to be mindful all the time.
Yeah.
And I don't think I could say that one group of people is more mindful than another. Certain environments. I mean, I remember that when I first came home from after living in India, that there was no place. It felt like there was nowhere to go to be quiet. I mean, in the cities, we used to sneak into the back of churches, but then in the 70s they started locking up churches in this country because I guess when there began to be so much homelessness, whatever. So then you couldn't go into churches, and there was hardly any place to go to be quiet, which is why many of us began starting retreat centers. But so, I mean, I think there are cultures that support it more than others. But I can't say that. I mean, I never spent any time in Tibet, which is unique, I think.
Yes.
And certainly the area around Dharamsala now and so on is very special for what the Tibetans have brought to it. But, you know, I worked with Guatemalan people for a long time through Seva, and I mean, they never heard of mindfulness, but they were very deeply connected to the land. Their spirituality is very earth-based, and that kept them very aware of, you know, they had to be like very aware of the soil and of the weather and of everything they did was very kind of unified. And so in that way, probably they were more mindful, but they didn't like do mindful practice or, you know, have even heard the word. But they were very, very present in the moment. And I think that, you know, staying close to the land helps people do that. And of course now most of us are not close to the land anymore. So we have to, you know, we have to really practice in order to be mindful on the underground in London, you know.
Absolutely, yeah. I seem to spend more time underground or flying over the ground rather than actually on the ground. Yeah. That's really interesting. And you also mentioned there the word spirituality, and we haven't really talked about that. But do you think this mindfulness practice, you know, taking it into the workplace, in some way helps people to tune into their own inner sense of what it means to be spiritual?
Yeah, I do. We never use the word. I think I use it a couple times today, but at the center we never use it because it makes people extremely nervous.
Yeah.
And we really aren't. You know, it's not about religion. It's not about any kind of proselytizing spirituality. But mindfulness does take us into our inner life, and we get to see our thoughts and I think values, and it begins to take it will take us the whole way over time into understanding what has meaning for us, and that's what I think of as spirituality. You know, how we understand why we're here and what we're supposed to be doing, the whole ethical, moral domain, which is tricky to talk about in business, but so important. And so by working with mindfulness, it just takes us there without it being laid on. I remember one time we were working with scientists at Monsanto, and so it was very early on in the work of the center, and we were trying to figure out, because most Buddhist retreats begin with vows, you know, that, you know, vows not to kill, not to steal, and so on. And we knew that was inappropriate to ask these scientists at a secular retreat to take vows. But we also knew that, that whole domain of ethics and morality are really important to being able to do the practice. So we said, we'll talk about non-harming. We said, that we will hold this space in a spirit of non-harming, of respecting each other and respecting ourselves, and not doing anything that would cause harm to ourselves and others in any way. So about halfway through the retreat, someone came up to me, and he was making one of these really toxic products that they were making at the time.
Oh dear.
So he said, and it wasn't our job to criticize their products. It was our job to help them wake up, So, and we were brought in by the CEO, so it was all cool. So anyhow, he said, Mirabai, he said, non-harming. And he said, if you think about that, that has a lot of implications. Okay, you got it. You can go home now.
Yeah.
But, so, yeah, we don't even have to talk about these things in the workplace, but we have to be aware as people who are encouraging these practices and bringing them into work situations. We have to be aware that when people, begin to quiet down and look within, that there's a whole domain that will reveal itself over time, and which is really important. And that's one of the great powers and benefits of mindfulness. But it's also just something that sometimes people need some help to figure out what they're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. As we kind of come towards the end of the program, I wanted to ask you about this new CD, Working with Mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
Could you just say a little bit about what it contains and how it may be helpful for people?
It's mostly practices that we've done in various workplaces, including Google. Basic mindfulness practices in different settings, including the compassion and loving kindness practices. And I frame it by talking through it about ways in which we've used this, ways in which it can be useful in the workplace. And they're practices you can do yourself, so that, for example, in the Just Like Me practice, say, bring into your awareness someone you're working with, for example, and then try these phrases. So, I've simplified them somewhat, but they're basic practices, and they're framed for work. So I think that a lot of times people learn these practices outside, in a retreat center or somewhere in a yoga class or whatever, and can't always make that connection that that working together is, we are humans working together, and we're all trying to be happy and to wake up, and these practices will really help us do it, and they're really great at helping us work with other people and get clear and centered in the work that we do by ourselves. So it's like that.
Yeah. Well, I've tried it out and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really nice. And it had things like mindful emailing and other short practices that are really targeted for people who want to bring mindfulness to the workplace. So I think people can get it I got it from a website called morethansound.net, so people can find it there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just as the last question, could you offer maybe 2 or 3 tips for helping people to be a bit more mindful at work?
Excuse me, I didn't hear you.
Could you offer maybe 2 or 3 practical tips to help people to be a bit more mindful at work?
Yeah. How about simply just maybe every 10 emails or so, just take a breath. Just follow. You're breathing anyhow. The difference with mindfulness is you're paying attention to your breath. That's the only difference. So you don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to do anything. Just cast your eyes away from the screen and just follow one full breath from beginning to end, and then go back. That will connect you with the place in yourself that knows how to be compassionate, kind, truthful, and so on. So that's helpful.
Yeah.
And just remembering that everybody you're working with is also trying to do their best in the world. And allow your heart to open to others in that way, letting go of all the stuff about them that's difficult. Just letting that go, and for a moment remembering, just like you, they're trying to support their families and feel like they're making a contribution to the world, and sometimes not doing so well. So if you remember that when you see people, it'll really, really help you work better with them.
There's a couple of really nice tips. I'll try them straight away. Thank you. Well,
it's fun working with you. I don't have to do any of those practices.
I'm not sure.
I'd like to tell people they can go to contemplativemind.org because there's lots of wonderful, helpful information there.
Okay, great. Well, I'd just like to finish by saying thank you very much for your time. You've given up over an hour today to our listeners to help them to be a bit more mindful at work and to share your stories. So I'd really like to say a big thank you to you for that.
Well, I love doing it, and I hope you'll stay in touch.
So you've been listening to the Mindfulness Radio Show. For more information or to listen to past programs, simply go to mindfulnessradio.com. Thanks for joining us, and hopefully you can join us again next Wednesday at 8 p.m.